indie games make a lot of hay combining elements of popular known quantities. Supraland is a blatant example. It's a mix of Portal, Zelda, and Metroid, resulting in a first-person Metroidvania with lots of puzzles. There isn't much like it. The game launched for PC back in April 2019, and it just appeared on Game Pass for PC after a recent launch on consoles. Is this potpourri of success an intoxicating concoction? Let's find out if Supraland is a Game Pass or a game fail. Supraland is set in a sandbox world created by a child. It does a lot with it. The objective is to reach the Blue Kingdom to complain after some rebellious blues turn off the Red Town's water. It sounds almost too simple, but there are a lot of allusions to religion, and many of the characters break the fourth wall and share that they are self-aware. At the very least, it creates plenty of opportunities for pop culture references. Even though it's a bunch of things smashed into one, Supraland tries its best to defy any categorization. It has some of the most creative gameplay ideas we've seen in years. The puzzles aren't trivial, and the game rarely just dumps the answers at your feet. Talking to NPCs and carefully studying the environment wins the day. This sometimes leads to creative puzzle solutions like bouncing on enemy shields to reach new areas. With no map to keep track of your progress, there's some trial and error involved, and we won't lie, we had to look at a guide once or twice. While undoubtedly creative, Supraland's gameplay is a bit rough. There's more combat than you might expect, and landing sword attacks is finicky in the early going. Until you find some upgrades, even the weakest baddie can easily take you out. The first-person platforming also has its quirks. You get a triple jump early on, but it only helps with distance. To reach higher platforms, you must spawn a cube. It's an interesting mechanic, but it forces you to start jumps looking at the ground, which can be awkward. Platforms are positioned either just within reach or just out of reach, and it's hard to tell which. Like any Metroidvania, Supraland has a bunch of upgrades to find, but it sometimes goes a bit too far. A lot of the essential buffs are placed in the tutorial, but it's also easy to miss some as you make progress. Basic upgrades like sword range, the ground pound, and coin drops should not be off the beaten path. We are sure speedrunners enjoy this because it creates an opportunity for low percentage runs, but the average Joe will have to backtrack after getting pummeled over and over again. Puzzle platformers are few and far between on Game Pass, and 3D puzzle platformers even more so. EA's Fia is the closest comp, and while it looks pretty, the gameplay is anything but. The two Unravel games are similar, but they don't put up much of a fight. The first two Trine games are also available, and while they are a bit old, they are still great examples of the genre, especially in co-op. As for the 3D platformers, Yooka-Laylee is now on Game Pass, and while it isn't outstanding, it bolsters a lineup that was very weak the last time we checked. Then there are the Banjo games, which do provide a nice mix of action and mental gymnastics. Metroidvanias are plentiful on the service, with the Ori games still leading the pack. Supraland isn't living on an island, but it's certainly on the outskirts of Game Pass. Now it's time to find out, is Supraland a Game Pass or a game fail? Supraland has some rough edges that could use some sanding. The gameplay lacks polish, and it's easy to overlook essential upgrades. It also has a fresh premise and that elusive spark of creativity in its puzzles that so many other games lack. You can also count its contemporaries on Game Pass on 0 fingers. We highly recommend giving it a try, as its design is just as self-aware as the characters living in its world. While it doesn't overstay its welcome, we won't judge if you decide to keep a guide handy to help you through the bumpy parts. Supraland, it's a Game Pass. For next week's episode, the randomizer selects Eastshade.